I'm Elaine Pardee. I've been a master gardener in Sarasota County since 2002, and I love it here. Before that, I gardened in Salt Lake City and Vancouver, Canada, where I'm originally from. So I've been gardening for well over 40 years now of my long life. And I'm going to talk to you about, growing edibles, which I'm assuming everybody wants to do. This is my overview. We're going to go through, hopefully get through soil preparation, mulching and watering, the seasons, which, it's in Florida, upside down from what it is in the northern states, pretty much. Gardening basics, which most of you probably know most of. Seeds and transplants. This is a kind of an interesting thing that you can do to expand or shorten the time to your harvest. I've got a couple of really good tomato tips. I've got some tips on increasing yield with succession planting. Pest and disease management. Carol is going to go over that in detail, so I won't go into that very, very detailed except for what I do. And alternate gardening techniques such as raised beds and containers, and some tips about Mother Nature, which we all have to deal with and respect, and your shutdown and advice on solarization, which is a really good idea to do here. Okay, I'm going to roll through pretty fast. If I'm going too fast, wave your hand and I'll go back. Okay, soil science. The soil pH must be within a range for your plants to be able to access the nutrients. We also have high phosphorus in our water here, and that can raise the pH of the soil just because you're watering with high phosphorus water. Well water is even higher than the water out of the tap that's been through the treatment plant, and has a lot more phosphates in it because, of course, our water comes from the aquifer, and the aquifer flows through phosphorus deposits in the northern and central part of Florida. So phosphorus in the water is also a problem because it also can bind up nutrients that otherwise would be available to your plants, which is another whole chemical thing that we won't go into too much. The soil pH tends to rise anyway over time because we have such heavy rains in the summer, and all the soluble stuff plus the organic material breaks down and sort of filters down through the layers of the soil and disappears from the upper, foot or foot and a half that you're using to garden your vegetables. So, and also, I'm sure you've all experienced that when you first dig into your plot in Florida here, you get gray sand and chunks of shell, right? Because it used to be a beach here, right? So we have shell, and shell is made of calcium, and calcium is alkaline. The calcium slowly leaches out and causes the soil pH again to rise. And a high soil pH is really bad for trying to garden with high demand plants like vegetables and fruits, which we're not going to grow too many fruits, but we'll talk about that later too. Okay, you should get a soil test or test your own soil. Now in a community garden, if you have quite a big plot, you'd want to take 2 or 3 different samples, and in that case, it's probably more economical for you to get a soil test kit and do your own testing. You can get a kit, I'm going to show in a minute, that does 10 tests, and you could share the cost with a few other community gardeners. And that one that I bought the other day that I'm going to test all the plots at the school garden with was under $12. So that's, something you could share with your fellow community gardeners if you wanted to. You should also test your water for its pH. Now, I collect rainwater at home, I have tap water in the house, and I also have a well. So I have 3 different sources of water, and I've tested them all. The rainwater, of course, is pretty neutral, which is wonderful, of course. Rainwater is the best possible thing you can water with. But the fatal flaw with collecting rainwater is you run out when it doesn't rain for 4 months, like it's been the last, And so rainwater is the best. The next is your tap water, which my tap water tends to be a pH of 7.6 to 7.8, which is just a little bit high. And my well water is 8.2, which is really very high. And if I have to irrigate for a long period of time, such as this last fall, when it's only rained 3 times since the beginning of October, all my garden that's irrigated with my well water is showing iron chlorosis. I've got a picture coming up of iron chlorosis. So iron chlorosis is the next point. It's your leaves get yellow with really dark veins. Organic material is by far the gold standard for raising or lowering the pH of your soil. But you have to keep adding it because it breaks down and washes through the soil, especially in our hot weather and especially in the summer when we get heavy rains. It breaks down very quickly in heat and high humidity and disappears on you. So you have to keep adding organic material to the soil because basically what you've got is sand. And as Monica Brandeis, who is another wonderful talker, if you get a chance to hear Monica talk, said in her book, which was the very first book I bought when I moved to Florida, it's called The Florida Gardener Survival Guide or something like that. She says, the soil will hold the plant up and you have to do everything else. So that's all your sand is going to do for you. If you amend it, the more you amend, the better it will be. You cannot use too much organic material in your garden. Okay, ammonium sulfate will very temporarily lower your pH, but it again is highly soluble, so it gets washed away and gets really expensive if you have to keep adding it. So just get as much organic material. Every time you come, bring a storage bin full of compost or leaves or whatever you can get your hands on and put it in. Add organic material. I cannot stress that enough. Okay. Here's my soil test kit I got the other day. We're going to test all our plots. We have 10 plots at the school garden that I work at Wilkinson. And we have 40 tests I can do, so I can keep this test kit and use it for 4 years. I test my water with the pH test kit for aquariums, but if you have a swimming pool, you can use your swimming pool pH testing kit too, and that works great. And as I say, I just bought this soil test kit last week for under $12. They're available at any garden centers. They're getting a lot better. They didn't used to be highly accurate, but the newer ones are very accurate now. We've tested them against the fancy soil testing equipment at the Extension office and got very similar results. So they are, if you follow the directions properly, of course, they are excellent. Okay, here's a picture of iron chlorosis. See the yellow leaves with the dark red, or dark green, I hope they're not red, veins. Just a quick picture, and a really pretty picture of a raised bed that we'll be talking about later. I love this raised bed with the beautiful new wood. Doesn't look like that very long though in Florida. Okay, soil amendments. Organic matter is anything that was a plant. And you can compost anything that was a plant, and the more composted it is, the smaller particles it's broken down into. But you can directly compost in such a way as you can just put leaves and organic material, hay, whatever you can get your hands on, use it as a mulch, and as it breaks down, turn it into your soil and have it compost in place. Composting in place is an accepted, method. It does contribute some nutrients, but don't depend on it to supply enough nutrients for vegetables, because vegetables are very, very, very hardworking plants producing stuff for you to eat. So they do need a dependable source of nutrient supply. Manure is the same thing. They're very variable, and they can be really high in the soluble nitrogen, which is the urea that comes through the animal that the manure came from. And if you use manure, especially if it's particularly fresh, it can very quickly burn your plants. You'll get crispy brown edges on the leaves. So be very careful of that. The other thing with manure, again, it's not a dependable source of nitrogen or other nutrients. It is a good source for organic material, of course. It's already been digested by the big horse composter or the cow composter. And, but it's not a dependable fertilizer. You still have to use something with a dependable supply that's going to last a while for your vegetable plants. So yeah, unless you're adding manure every couple of weeks, you really cannot depend on it for plant nutrition. All of the, as I said, all the organic material breaks down very quickly in our climate. You have to add more, and there's no such thing as too much. My personal favorite is alfalfa pellets. I brought a little baggie of them to pass around. If you'd like to just pass that around, let everybody see what that is. It's horse food. You want to be very careful that you get the pure stuff that's just ground up alfalfa. And some of it has Timothy hay in it or other, you know, not as nutritious stuff. Smells good, doesn't it? It smells a little worse after you water it and dig it in. It'll smell for a couple of days, like a little bit like horse manure, but yeah. It's very, very wonderful stuff for the garden. And fertilization. Now, I thought that Carol was going to cover fertilization, so I didn't do a segment on fertilization here, but you obviously know that there are approved fertilizers in your garden and for your community gardens, and you're not supposed to use pure chemical fertilizers. I'll just say that all fertilizers need to have the 3 basic components: nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus. Thank you. And that's the 3 main numbers that are on the bag. And then your organic fertilizers will have a range of micronutrients as well. Make sure that they have, you know, a good range of micronutrients, including especially magnesium is very important for vegetables. And the higher, sometimes it's as high as 2% of magnesium now. The higher the better for magnesium. And if you want to supplement, Epsom salts is also a good supplement. You can spray it on with a hose sprayer, and it's wonderful. Highly soluble. Once again, it's something that washes through when the rain is coming down. Okay, here's a bag of or a bowl of alfalfa pellets, just for the sake of the video. And the analysis on the package, right up there in the middle, it says ingredients, and it is ground alfalfa, 100%. So this is what you want to be sure of when you buy it. I get this at the stockyard, but you can get it at any feed store. I don't know what's down here in Venice. And it's great stuff. I put it in my pots. I make tea with it and fertilize it. I strain the alfalfa tea and spray it on my orchids. I use it for everything. I love it. Okay, mulching and watering. Nothing you can do better for your garden than mulch. We don't want to use rubber or stones. Mulch reduces watering because evaporation accounts for 75% of the water loss. The sun beating on the soil and heats the soil up, and the water just goes and disappears before the plant's roots can get to it. A good organic mulch can insulate the soil very, very well. You should use 3 to 4 inches of fluffy mulch. It does settle after time, but rubber and stone don't insulate well because the holes between the pieces let the air circulate too much, and they heat up in the sun. So they really actually almost do more harm than good. I wouldn't put rubber or stones anywhere near a vegetable garden, of course. Greatly reduces weeds. That's been a wonderful benefit in the school garden, which I'm going to talk about in a second here. Prevents erosion. Okay, in the summer, you've got so much heavy rain coming down. If it's beating straight on your sandy soil, as I said before, it's going to wash all the soluble stuff and all the organic materials straight through, and it'll be lost to your, you know, your friable soil that you're trying to use for your vegetables. Disease control, it prevents the water from splashing onto the plants, mainly. A lot of the fungal, I mean, we live in Florida, there's fungus in every breath we take and every drop of water, and there's lots of fungal material in the soil. And if it's splashing up onto the leaves of your plants, you're going to get infections onto the leaves much more readily. So a nice cushy layer of mulch will prevent a lot of splashing. And of course, when it breaks down, you want it to add all that organic material back into the soil. Can't have too much organic material. Okay, watering, you really want to be sure you water the soil. If you can get a sprinkler or a system, soaker system, or I'm going to talk about micro-irrigation in a second. This keeps the water down low underneath the leaves, underneath the leaf canopy of a lot of your vegetables. You know, the really low stuff and the leafy greens, not necessarily, but it, again, prevents a lot of disease transmission. If there's water on the leaves, fungal things land in the water and go, ah, a sauna. Yeah, so they grow really well and they're very happy. You do always want to water early in the morning. Do not water in the evening if you can help it. Because if the leaves of your plants are left wet overnight, and there's no breeze to dry them, and the humidity is 95%, which it is here for a good 5 months of the year, you're going to have all kinds of fungal joys on your plants. And the plants stay much healthier if you can water deeply in the morning, and then the leaves dry off during the day and are dry overnight. Hopefully it doesn't rain in the afternoon, which it sometimes does here, but there's nothing you can do about that. We love the rainwater, so. You want to check at the beginning the water penetration into the soil, and the way to do that is to poke your finger in, open up, or your trowel, open up a little slit and look and see how far down the water is percolated. Because just watering the top ½ inch of your soil is not going to do a whole lot for your plant. So please, please, at the beginning, make sure you're watering long enough that the water is penetrating down into the root system. Some of your vegetables and fruits like tomatoes have very deep roots, and one of the reasons tomatoes are actually quite drought tolerant is because the roots are so deep. So, you know, you do want to water really deeply and really thoroughly each time you water. So at the school garden, when the weather's hot, our micro-irrigation system is on for an hour every morning. And we have wonderful crops there. Okay, whoops, did I do everything here? Micro-irrigation. Yes, puts water where you need it and off the foliage. Micro-irrigation keeps the water down low. This is Linda Ayad, my wonderful partner at the Wilkins School Garden, and she and I put in a micro-irrigation system in one Saturday morning, the two of us, for 6 raised beds at that time, and there are 10 now, so we've added to it for just over $100. We have one hose bib for this whole garden. We now have 10 raised beds, so we've got splitters and all kinds of tricks to get the water where we need it. But it was very, very easy and very economical, and it keeps the water right where we need it. You can see we have these tall raised beds. These ones are 4 by 8, and 2 of these little circular emitters. If you can see where she's got her fingers like this, there's a little circular sprinkler emitter there, and it does half the bed. So we've found that this is sufficient for what we're growing, and the nice thing about micro-irrigation is it's flexible. You can turn it on or off. You can increase or decrease the amount that the emitters are giving out, and you can just pick it up and move it a little bit if it's not covering an area of your garden. Very, very flexible. The parts are very inexpensive and widely available. All the garden centers have them. The water is applied slowly so it gets a chance to trickle down in, but again, you want to check after you've watered. You know, if you're there for an hour, you turn your water on, you do your work while your water is going, and then you turn it off and you're about to leave. Stick your finger in the soil and see how far down that water got. Okay, that's our wonderful micro-irrigation, and these are the little components we use. The feeder tube is a black ½ inch plastic polycarbonate, I think, tubing. 50 feet of it is under $10. And the little components, you get 3 of these little circular emitters, which is what we mostly use. A package of 3 is under $3. So they're very, very inexpensive, and the beauty of the system is you can do it yourself, and it's flexible, so you can change it at will. Put water where you want it, turn water off where you don't want it. Okay. Mulch. We used hay. Stacy got hay donated to us for our school gardens this year, which was really wonderful. And the hay has been a huge benefit as a mulch in our vegetable beds. You can see it here in the front of this bed and in the far bed at the top left there, covering the soil really nicely. Hay is a light color, so it tends to reflect the heat, insulates really nicely, doesn't get packed down too much. And we, in the 5th graders' bed, and of course the 5th graders are always into an experiment, we mulched half the bed with hay and left half the bed empty, or unmulched, not empty. We planted the same plants in both halves, and it was so very obvious after only a few weeks that the mulch side was doing so much better that we agreed to abandon the experiment because the hay was doing a huge benefit for the garden. And you know how very warm and humid it was well through October this year. So yeah, we really needed the hay to keep the beds cooler and conserve moisture. And we really didn't need the hay to prevent any erosion because there wasn't any rain. But we do need to conserve water because the school is starting to say, my gosh, your school garden bed is using a lot of water. And we are. Weed suppression has been a wonderful benefit as well. There hasn't been nearly as much weeding having to be done, although I'll tell you, a class of third graders can weed a 4x8 bed in 5 minutes. It's really great. So if you've got an access to a scout troop or Girl Scouts or anybody, ask them to come over and weed your plot for you if you're having trouble. That's a great resource, actually. And of course, it adds nutrients. We just now pulled up all the plants and we're starting a new garden for the spring semester for the kids. Pulled all the plants out and we've dug in all the hay that was on the top. So it's adding its nutrients now and texture to the soil. And we use the Mulch wood chips. You can see it in between the beds there for the pathways, but we don't use that in our garden beds because it doesn't break down fast enough. So if you're planting things that are planted from seed, seedlings have a big problem coming up when there are big chunks of wood in their way. So we use the hay instead, and we actually, if we seed a row, we don't put the hay over where the seeds are supposed to come up until the seedlings are a good size. So hay is a wonderful, wonderful mulch, and again, not very expensive. I can't tell you how much it costs, because we got hay for free. Thank you, Stacy. Thank you, Zach. Okay, gardening year-round here in Florida is a wonderful thing. I'm being very hypocritical here because I must admit I have retired from gardening in the summer. It's just too hot for me. I can barely keep the pathways open in my yard through the summer in 10-minute increments, after which I go and lay in my pool for a while because the heat just gets to me. So I don't grow much of anything through the summer unless some of my vegetables survive the heat, which sometimes the basil and the eggplant make it through. But the rest pretty much peter out and get inundated by the jungle of weeds that grows up to eye level. Cool season things do wonderfully, and now is the time, right now, plant. Actually, if you wanted to start early, planting about the second week of December is really a good idea to start some transplants early in the house, as long as you can give them good light. We'll talk about that in a minute. Cold season things can tolerate frost. Some of us even did have a little bit of frost last weekend. Got down to 40 in my yard, and I'm out near the coast. So cold season things are not going to be bothered by the frost, but they will be slowed down if we have some cold nights. Now, really, we haven't had enough cold weather to cool the soil off yet. So the soil is a huge heat sink here that's breathing out heat, even though, 2 40-degree nights isn't going to cool off your soil very much. We're going to have a whole week of really cold weather with rain before the soil's going to cool down a whole lot. So we're pretty confident that we're not going to have a whole lot of frost damage yet this winter, but we'll see. Moving on. Warm season things like your tomatoes, your peppers, your eggplant, your beans, squash, and cucumbers, they really need temperatures above 50 degrees at night. Now, if we're going to have a night that's going to go below 50, you're going to need to think about some frost protection. And I'll talk about that in a minute. I brought a sample of my frost cloth with me. If we do get a frost and you don't cover up and you have tomatoes with fruit on the vine like this beautiful picture that Kevin put in here for me, oh, makes my mouth water, you will lose all your leaves. It may or may not kill the plant outright, but you will lose all your leaves if we get a frost. And frost can occur in temperatures as high as 36 degrees. So we were really close to getting frost if we didn't get some already. Anytime it's going to go below 50 though, your plants will benefit from being covered only because they'll slow down. Even if they don't die, they still will slow down. Your tomatoes will stop setting fruit on a 50-degree night. And they'll stop not for 3 days, they'll stop for 3 weeks. You'll have flowers and they'll just drop off, or they just won't set fruit, because the plant has been stressed and the plant is recovering and it's got to get up to speed again. So yes, if you have time and you have the resources to cover up your plants when there's going to be a run of cool nights, it's a really good idea. Heat also can stop your tomatoes. I don't know if any of you have gardened all the way into the summer here, but my tomatoes are beautiful one day and the next day I come out and they're looking like this. They've completely gone overnight from the heat, and usually I think there's a blight that goes around that gets them in the summertime as well. It's very quick, but even if you can keep them alive into the summer weather, 70 degrees or so through the night is going to stop them from setting fruit as well. So if you wonder, all of a sudden my tomatoes aren't giving me any more tomatoes, I've got tomatoes on the vine and I've got lots of flowers and I'm not getting any fruit, it's probably because the night temperatures have gotten too warm. So that's a very common thing to happen here in the summer. Starts about May and goes into June. So pretty much I just yank my tomatoes out around the beginning of June and call it a day for the summer. Florida hybrids, we have a lot of Florida hybrids. The University of Florida has been working hard on developing hybrids that will tolerate higher temperatures. And some of them are okay, but I haven't had any of them that I've really liked the flavor of, I must admit. Cherry tomatoes, once in a while you will get them. And oh, there's a well-kept secret. There's a little tomato called an Everglades tomato. And Everglades tomatoes actually do go through the summer. It's a little tiny cherry tomato like this, and apparently they're really good and they do survive the summers. So they must be blight tolerant as well. Okay, watermelons, oh my. Here I'm talking about something that I don't do, as I've already said. A lot of plants will tolerate the summer heat. As I say, eggplants, okra, sweet potatoes. Basil does really well through the summer for me, and the hot peppers. But as the temperatures heat up and the nights get really warm, your battle with bugs and fungal diseases gets incrementally more intense. So you have to be ever more vigilant as the weather gets hot. The beautiful picture of watermelons will make your mouth water, but I wouldn't grow melons. There are several reasons. One of them is they take up a tremendous amount of room. Secondly, they take a tremendous amount of water. And thirdly, they are very, very susceptible to powdery mildew and a couple of different kinds of caterpillars that feed on them. You'll have these gorgeous melon or squash or cucumber plants sitting there with big leaves like this, standing up there majestically. And you'll come out the next day and you'll find all the leaves like this. And it's because the stem borers have gotten into the stems and just eaten up through the middle. So it's very discouraging. It's been very discouraging to me to try and grow any melons or any cucumbers or any squash. Okay, where are we at? Cool weather best. Okay, this is our bed at the school, and this particular bed is going really well right now. I planted some carrot seeds before the winter break, and the lettuce was going really nicely. Unfortunately, again, it's been a little bit too hot for lettuce. Lettuce, unfortunately, turns bitter in weather that's too warm. And it is a defense mechanism developed by the plant so it won't be eaten by the critters. But all of this lovely looking lettuce, and some of the plants are only about this big. They're really quite small, and I tasted a little bit of each leaf, and they're all as bitter as can be, just because it's been too hot. Too warm, I should say. It hasn't been hot, but it's been lovely. So I must admit, in my own garden, I don't grow any lettuce anymore. I've just given up on it. I grow spinach. I grow a lovely French green called mâché, or corn salad. I grow radicchio and those, it usually comes in a mix called mesclun salad greens, delicious different kinds of greens. And the mustard greens like Mizuna are wonderful salad, and they don't do this bitter business with the like the lettuce does. So I've gone away from lettuce a little bit. Okay, here's some seeds for cool weather planting. Leafy greens are ready very quickly. Be ready to use them up, and don't plant too much at once because you'll be overwhelmed and you'll be giving them to all your neighbors, and you know. If we get all of a sudden starts to heat up in February, they'll bolt to seed. All of a sudden you'll start seeing a flower stem coming up, and 2 days later the stem is this high and it's got flowers on it. And by then the leaves are all tough and probably not very good to eat. So yeah, they bolt to seed very quickly when the weather gets hot. Okay, root vegetables, mulching is paramount, very important, just because it keeps the soil cool and keeps the roots that you're trying to develop moist. So mulching is incredibly important for root vegetables. What else? We grow some really wonderful colored vegetables. See the one on the lower right there? It's a purple cauliflower. It's really beautiful. Okay, this is my raised bed with tomatoes and broccoli in there. And days to harvest. Days to harvest is really important because especially if you're only here for a short time, you're going to go home in May or June, you want to get a harvest from your plants that you planted in February. You probably should start early with some transplants. But you can check the days to harvest on the seed packet, and it'll have 52 days, 65 days, 84 days, 93 days. Those would be examples of, say, tomatoes, that you can get a range of a couple of months that you would get a harvest sooner from an earlier variety. Okay, varies widely, especially dependent on the weather, of course. If we have a run of cold weather, the days to harvest will be longer. If we have really warm weather, it'll be shorter. So another thing that's absolutely paramount, along with never enough organic material, is you can't pay close enough attention to the weather when you're gardening for vegetables. If the weather's going to be bad, you've got to be on top of it and be proactive. Don't go to your garden in 3 days after a frost and say, oh gee, I wish I'd covered my plants, right? So yeah, it's very, very important to be cognizant of the weather. All right, here's some tomato seeds that I had for the school garden, and with a range of days to harvest. The Momotaros are 74 days, the Sugaries are 60, and the Red Rose is 85. They're also determinate and indeterminate tomatoes. Determinate tomatoes grow up and bear all their fruit all at once. So your harvest is going to be all at once. That's great to grow determinates if you want to make things like tomato sauce, because you'll have all your tomatoes at once. Otherwise, the indeterminates just keep growing. If you can keep an indeterminate tomato growing, it can be a vine 40 feet wide. They're humongous. They're designed to lay on the ground and scuttle along and do their thing. The stems that touch the ground will root. They're amazing plants, but indeterminate tomatoes will get very large. Okay. Cold protection. Well, I have a gigantic tent that protects my earth boxes that are on a stand. And I came out a few days ago and found this. This is a frost cloth. I thought I'd bring a sample of frost cloth to show you, but the squirrels have gotten at my tent and shredded it, and I saw him taking off through my stand of bamboo with a piece of my cloth in his mouth. He's keeping warm with it. So yes, the frost cloth really does insulate very well. The beauty of using frost cloth over using something like cardboard or cloth, old sheets, tablecloths, stuff like that is it's not very absorbent. So if it rains before it gets cold, it doesn't weigh the plants down and dries very quickly. It insulates really well. And if you can't get over to whip it off in the morning, it lets about 60% of the sunlight through. So this is a really good thing. If you're going away for a week in the winter and there's cold weather predicted, better to cover up with something like this than to leave your plants uncovered and come back to a dead garden, in my opinion. There's different weights. This is a little bit lighter weight one here and not shredded by the squirrel. I use these also to shade my seedlings if I start seedlings in the garden. We'll talk about that in a minute. Okay, use frost cloth. That's what we're talking about. If you use other stuff, it has to be removed so that the sunlight can get to your plants. And never, ever, ever use plastic unless you can literally make a greenhouse out of it and it doesn't touch your plants, because it will do more harm than good if it's touching the leaves of your plants. The ground, again, as I said, was a heat sink. It's absorbed all that lovely sun and heat energy, and if you cover up, you can come back. I've done this before. I've gone out and put another plant under the tent and opened the thing up and had a blast of lovely warm air come out of this little tent in my garden, because it's trapping all that moist heat that's coming up from the soil. So wonderful. So that is it. And we have my name up here, but the information is for the plant clinic at the extension office. That is not my direct contact. But if you call the plant clinic desk anytime, they can put you in touch with me. And I'll be glad to answer questions. Or mostly the plant clinic people can answer your questions themselves as well.